Hey Matt,
How are you?
thanks for having us here.
Absolutely.
I love being at the Oaks Club. It's always fun to see the action and some of the cool games that you guys have. The reason we're here, we'd love to discuss ZooBac and how the whole game came about, also how we met. So I'll ask you some questions.
Sure.
Hopefully the microphone is going to be picking up the interview, but I'm sure it's going to be fine. So Matt, first tell us about the original idea, how ZooBac came about, when, and what kind of brought the idea about.
Sure. Originally we had a different version of Baccarat, and Baccarat is one of the most popular games in the casinos now. And we had what's widely considered an inferior version of Baccarat, kind of left over from the previous management. And even though it's not my department, I would look over and see that the action wasn't too good. That was kind of depressing. We should have been getting better Baccarat action. Mm-hmm. So I took it upon myself to go to management and say, look, I'll develop a new game for you. I'll develop a new Baccarat game. You help cover the cost of getting it off the ground, and we'll see if it works out. And that was 4 years ago, and the game's been going strong ever since. And I think they're happy with their decision to go with ZooBac at the Oaks.
How many tables is ZooBac currently at in not only Oaks Club, but also across the state?
Right, well, we've got 2 tables here at the Oaks. We've got 3 other tables across the state. We've got 1 in Sacramento, 1 in Tracy, 1 in Monterey, and looking to expand even further.
Tell us, so as I understand, as you mentioned, the first version of the game was developed by another developer. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about that experience, how long the whole process lasted, and then also how you decided to actually come about and look for a third-party developer for the second version of the board?
Sure. The first version was very utilitarian. We just wanted to get the game off the ground. So there weren't any bells and whistles. It was just more of a very basic, no moving parts scoreboard. I had a friend of mine who was a software developer, and he agreed to do it at low cost as a favor. Still took a good 2 or 3 months. It was not something he was used to doing. And what he came up with was very good. It was useful. But again, it wasn't exciting. It was just enough to get the game started. Mm-hmm. The second time around, we wanted more bells and whistles. We wanted it to be more colorful, moving parts, more of a video game feel to it. So that's how we came across working with Cider and doing the second iteration of the scoreboard.
So Matt, another question. So yes, the first version was done by your developer local, I believe here in Oakland.
Yes.
Also, we're a local company in San Francisco. What was the original thought process saying, well, I want to bring a third-party resource rather than hire my own in-house in the casino to actually utilize to build this and maybe some other games?
Right. Sometimes it's easier just to work with somebody you don't know, right? And somebody that doesn't have any, I knew I wanted a Baccarat scoreboard, but that doesn't mean I needed the developer to know how Baccarat was played or to know anything about Baccarat. In some ways it was even better for them to have no preconceived notions of what it should look like, and that way their ideas would be fresher and maybe something that I hadn't thought of. For example, the blue background for this game was not something that I thought of, and that was an idea that you guys had put forth. And originally, I was like, no, I want it to look more like the Baccarat games that are out there already. But the more I looked at it, it was like, you know what? It's got a nice outdoorsy feel to it. People stay cooped up inside for a little too long, and especially with the bonus screens being out on sort of a grassy field. These are things I would not have thought of, so it was good to work with somebody that hadn't seen the other versions of Baccarat and had their own ideas.
Can you give our viewers some tips in how you actually went about in selecting a software development company, mm-hmm. what things you were looking out for, and what, in your opinion, in that selection process worked and maybe didn't work?
Sure. I went online, basically, starting from scratch. I came across any number of software development companies. 4 of them looked especially promising, obviously Cider being one of them. When I contacted you guys, you're very prompt about returning my call right away, setting up an in-person meeting. I mean, that showed a level of interest as opposed to some other places that were like, well, email us what you have in mind and we'll email you a quote. And right away I'm like, they're not taking me seriously.
Yeah.
You know, because there's just so many details involved. Like, it really requires sitting down with the person, getting to know what their vision is,
Absolutely.
what they have in mind, and only through that can you really know if it's a project you'd be able to do and do well.
Okay, great. Thanks for answering that. Another question is, so during the project, so, Cider, we reached out to you, we communicated, we actually settled on what your requirements were. But throughout the project, what did you experience as far as communication with the team? How was that managed in your opinion? Was it positive? Was there anything that you would add to that?
It was a positive. I mean, I really like the Trello platform. I mean, that enabled me to see changes in real time. I mean, sometimes almost as we were talking, one of the developers would be making a change and posting it, and mid-sentence I would see the change. I mean, that's pretty incredible. So I like that aspect of it. I like the, back and forth. I believe we met twice a week in conference calls, and that allowed us to make sure that nothing was going in the wrong direction. If something started to look like it wasn't what I was envisioning, then we were correcting it quickly enough that nobody was wasting their time.
So it sounds like you were interested, and you liked that approach, the kind of the real time rather than reactive, but it was very much a proactive approach, I believe. So
definitely. I mean, and maybe that's just a personal preference, but I like being involved in every aspect of it. I'm not the type to hand it over to a project manager and say, you deal with it. I mean, I like being personally involved. So in that regard, this was the perfect setup for someone like me where, I got to watch the progress as it was taking place. And
I think in my opinion also, it's really important to have an involved customer such as yourself, because in many cases customers are not so much interested in being involved in the details and day-to-day operations of a project software development. So when a customer like you comes in and says, listen, I want to be hands-on, I want to be following the progress, it's not only shows involvement and interest in the customer to actually have the project be a success, but also helps us in driving the project forward and not having to guess on what the customer is envisioning, but rather getting real-time feedback. It's really good.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and then it would be terrible if you spent hundreds of hours creating a final product and then the customer comes forward and says, that's not what I had in mind.
That's right. So before we actually started working on the project, did you have a preference in the type of technology that the board was going to be written in? Or were you leaving that completely to the technology team to make a decision on?
Honestly, I was leaving that completely to you. I had no preconceived ideas of what software. What my previous developer had used was a lot more simplistic than what was required for this, so we weren't going to go with that. And that was the only one I had been familiar with.
Tell me just in a few words, the biggest differences that you see between your original board, which was amazing. You got the job done, it was making money for the casino, and that's the number one goal, and it was engaging as well. But difference between the original board and what you wanted really for the new version of the board.
I mean, this is a lot more eye-catching. I mean, is it okay if I demonstrate?
Of course,
something?
yeah.
Okay. So for example, I mean, you have to be somewhat up close to see what's going on here. You can't be all the way across the room. But for example, if one of the bonuses comes up, you can tell from across the room that the entire screen just changed. And now you look and see which bonus, it's the rabbit that just hit. It makes people look twice. They see the board change that dramatically, and it catches their eye that a bonus hit, and now they're going to be more engaged in the game. Whereas before, it was just these simple symbols that were filling the screen, which are a necessary part of the game, but not as eye-catching. I mean, even just these moving parts of having the results move to their final place on the board. I mean, all these things are grabbing people's attention a lot more than the original board was.
That's great. Perfect. Were there, so the positives aside, which is great, were there any challenges that you faced during the project that you would have liked to possibly improve in the actual process of development and communication? Were there anything that you can think of that would have been better, not only for Cider to improve on, but also for other software projects such as this to learn from?
I think a lot of it was on my shoulders in that, I said before that it was helpful that you didn't know Baccarat and didn't have any preconceived notions, but by the same token, I had to remember that you don't know anything about Baccarat, and I had to remember all the details that would be obvious to someone that knows the game, but there's no reason for the software developer to know it because he doesn't know the game.
Yep.
So I think that was the advice I would have, is that in the original sit down and discussing the scope of the project, that the customer should remember all the little details and get them out there from the beginning, and that way both parties could have a better idea of the exact scope of the project. I remember when we sat down, maybe I felt a little time constraint, which was my doing, but at the same time I probably didn't go into as much detail as I should have, and then later on when we're discussing the scope of the project, it was like, oh, you wanted this and this and this, you didn't mention that originally. So that was the only thing. It was no problem once you learned that X, Y, and Z were needed, X, Y, and Z were done. But I guess a better back and forth before the project even began.
Yep. Thank you. So another question, was it helpful for you to actually have a project manager that was local, Bay Area based, to help you in communication with the development team and doing some of the day-to-day activities? Or would you have been comfortable working with the developers directly on your own in running the project?
I don't know if this is the answer you're looking for. In this specific case, some of the developers didn't speak English, I don't think. So I definitely needed the project manager, if for no other reason, to act as the translator and the intermediary. But no, it definitely helped to have somebody local, and it made me feel more comfortable. I mean, there were situations that came up near the end, for example, when we rolled out. There were, a couple of unforeseen things, all minor, but still things that required attention. And it was just so much easier to have somebody local, and he could actually come to the site and take a look at it in action. And I could recreate any issue that took place. And, I think that would have been a lot easier than taking a video and sending it to someone. I mean, it would have been doable, just a lot more difficult. And,
Understandable. Last question, Matt. What are your plans, not having to name any specific locations or anything like that, anything that's private, but we're curious about what are your plans for ZooBac expansion? What are you planning to do with the game? Outside of Oaks, other casinos that you currently have?
Right. Yeah, I mean, right now we're in a few casinos in Northern California. That looks like the most likely market to expand in, because a lot of people are already familiar with it. For example, dealers from another casino, dealers like to gamble. They come over, they see this game, then they go back to their casino and say, wow, I just played this game and it was a lot of fun. That makes it easier to expand within the region. In the long run, we're looking to expand to Southern California, Las Vegas. I got contacted by someone in Canada. There's a lot of red tape to that, but it's exciting to know that it came across the radar of somebody in another country even. And I think the new board had a lot to do with that. So seems to be working out well.
Actually, there is one more question. You can answer it or not.
Okay.
Tell us about the Oaks, how the casino has received the game itself, things like that. If there's anything
absolutely.
You want to talk about the casino,
No, I'm very proud of that. I mean, the result over the past 4 years, without getting into the specific financial numbers, it's done a lot better than the previous version of Baccarat. So it's here to stay, and it's become part of the culture at the Oaks. I mean, there's the rabbit, tiger, and monkey bonus bets, and even people that don't play Baccarat, they hear a cheer come up from the table. They're like, oh, they just hit the monkey.
Yeah.
I mean, it's part of the Oaks culture now, so it's here to stay. Since I work here, I get to see it on a day-to-day basis. I don't know firsthand if it's done the same at other casinos where it's sort of become part of the culture, but I'd like to think it has. Other Baccarat games have different bonus bets of Panda the Dragon. When this game first came out, people still reference those. Now nobody talks about the Panda or the Dragon here. It's forgotten about. This game has taken over. So, and the Oaks was very supportive. I mean, I give them a lot of credit. It's not always, you have to go out on a limb to be the first casino to try a new game, especially from somebody who had never developed a game before.
Yeah.
They were taking a chance, and they put their trust in me, and I really appreciated that and didn't take it for granted, and hopefully their trust in me paid off.
So Matt, I think a little fun fact about you, you're a famous guy in the poker world. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your background in that?
I'm retired now, but I did play poker professionally for 14 years. I wrote a book in 2005 called The Book of Bluffs, which sold over 40,000 copies.
Great.
Thanks. I mean, that was really during the poker boom when televised poker was just getting started, and it was really a great time to be a poker player. I made 3 or 4 different TV appearances, and I mean, it was fun. There were definitely other jobs that would have been less stress and would have maybe paid better, but there was something fun about playing poker for a living, and I miss it a little bit, but it's also nice to have a steady job too.
That's amazing. Matt, thanks very much for your time. I understand you're working today, so Matt actually runs this section of the casino, the Baccarat table, ZooBac. Again, it's a very successful game here. Matt has been always gracious to invite us here, and hey, food at Oaks is great.
Matt, thank you. Absolutely.
All right. Thanks.